I remember the room was filled with friends and family, laughter mingling with the soft music in the background. It was the kind of gathering where love felt tangible, where everyone gathered to celebrate a milestone. My father stood at the center, raising a toast to mark his retirement. I should have been happy, relieved even, but an unsettling feeling crept beneath my skin. It was during a toast, one of those moments when everyone's attention was elsewhere, that I heard Jake's voice. He was speaking to a small cluster of cousins, his words punctuated with excitement. "Finally," he said, "I'll be taking over the family business, the flower shop." I paused, a drink halfway to my lips. My heart skipped, like the flutter of petals caught in a sudden breeze. That shop wasn't just a business. It was my life's work, my heart and soul. I had nurtured it from a mere idea to a flourishing enterprise, each bloom and bouquet a testament to my dedication. Jake's words echoed in my mind, drowning out the chatter and laughter around me. He sounded so certain, so assured, as if this was a foregone conclusion. It felt like a betrayal, one that had been brewing quietly beneath the surface, unnoticed by me until this very moment. As I stood there, the room continued to swirl in celebration, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted within me. Questions tumbled through my thoughts. How had I not known? How could they decide without me? And most pressing of all, why hadn't they even bothered to discuss it with me? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rapid beating of my heart. The retirement party was not the place for confrontations or scenes. My father deserved this moment of joy, undisturbed by what felt like a shadow creeping across our family. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. A realization settled in that behind the smiles and toasts lay decisions made in secrecy, without my input, without my knowledge. I had been sidelined in my own story, my role quietly rewritten. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. My smiles felt forced, my responses automatic. Inside, I was turning over every detail I knew, trying to piece together how this had happened, how I had been kept so entirely in the dark. As the party wound down, I watched from a distance as Jake chatted animatedly, his confidence barely contained. A quiet resolve formed within me. I knew there was more to this than idle chatter. There had to be a plan, a decision formalized somewhere beyond my vision. I decided right then that I would have answers. Perhaps not that night, but soon. I would uncover the truth behind Jake's blatant confidence about taking over something I had poured my life into. As Jake laughed with his friends, seemingly oblivious to the weight of his words, I turned away, my mind already plotting my next steps. The betrayal cut deep, but I stood firm, knowing that whatever lay ahead, I would face it head on. The morning after the retirement party, I stood outside my father's office, the memories of last night still fresh in my mind. I couldn't let this slide, not without understanding why. I knocked gently before pushing the door open, finding my father seated behind his desk, papers strewn about. A familiar scene I had witnessed countless times growing up. As I entered, Jake stood beside him, a smug air surrounding him. My heart clenched at the sight, but I forced myself to stay composed. "We need to talk," I began, my voice firm, though tinged with a hint of the pain I felt. My father looked up, his eyes meeting mine, a mixture of surprise and something unreadable in his gaze. "Of course," he replied, waving me in. Jake didn't bother to move, his presence a reminder of last night's revelation. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I couldn't help overhearing at the party," I said, keeping my words measured. "Jake mentioned taking over the flower shop. I'm curious about how this decision was made without consulting me." Jake shifted, crossing his arms, his attitude turning. "It's not what you think," he said, dismissing my concerns as if they were trivial. I shot him a look, my patience thinning. "Then enlighten me," I replied, struggling to maintain my composure. My father leaned back in his chair, the authority he usually carried with ease now feeling burdensome. "It was a family decision," he began, his tone trying to soften the blow. "We thought it would be best to keep the business in the family, with new energy to drive it." Well, words hung in the air, a stark admission that felt like a slap. I blinked, processing the betrayal. "A family decision," I echoed, my voice betraying the disbelief that coursed through me. "Without talking to the one who's been running the shop, day in and day out?" Jake rolled his eyes, his voice turning. "You're always so dramatic about things. It's about securing the future." "In what world does that secure anything?" I replied, my frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You've never shown any interest in the shop before." My father sighed, a heaviness in his breath. "It's already been signed over," he said, his words final and unyielding. "It's done. We thought it was for the best." A silence fell over the room, the weight of it pressing down on me. I stood there, every fiber of my being urging me to argue, to fight back. But I knew it would be futile. The papers were signed, the decision was made without me. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, but I remained. I see, I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil within. Then there's nothing more to discuss. I turned away, my heart aching, not waiting for their responses. It was clear they had made their choice. But as I left the office, a quiet determination settled over me. I wouldn't let their betrayal define me or diminish what I had built. Walking down the hallway, past the familiar walls that had once signified warmth and family, I made a silent vow to myself. I'd find a way to reclaim what was truly mine, to restore the legacy I had dedicated myself to crafting. Their decision to exclude me would not be the end of my story. It would be the beginning of a new chapter, one in which I would write my own path, free from the shadows of their betrayal. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur of quiet pain. I stayed away from the shop, trying to process the betrayal without letting it consume me. But part of me needed to see what was happening, to witness firsthand what Jake was doing with the business I had poured my soul into. I often found myself lingering across the street, watching through the large storefront window as Jake fumbled about inside. His movements were clumsy, lacking the care and precision that running a flower shop required. Customers entered with hopeful smiles, but often left with puzzled expressions or empty hands. It was like watching an artist's masterpiece being slowly dismantled by an amateur. With each passing day, it became more apparent that he was out of his depth. I overheard snippets of conversations when I dared to approach closer. Long-time customers expressing their disappointment, their loyalty tested by wilting bouquets and orders gone wrong. "This isn't right," one elderly woman muttered to another as they exited, casting a worried glance back at the shop. Her sentiment echoed in the pit of my stomach. Jake's inexperience extended beyond just customer service. The familiar faces of vendors I'd worked tirelessly to build relationships with showed up less frequently. I could tell from their curt nods and strained smiles that things were not going smoothly. I learned through whispers and snippets that Jake had missed deliveries, failed to pay on time, and dismissed their concerns with an arrogance that only worsened the situation. Inside, my frustration grew, swelling like a tide I couldn't hold back. I wanted so badly to step in to show Jake how things were supposed to be done, but I held back. This was his mess to clean up now. I watched silently, with a determination to see how it all unfolded. One afternoon, as I stood on the opposite sidewalk, hidden behind a group of tourists, admiring the street's quaint charm, I noticed the shop's doors shut tight in the middle of the day. A handwritten sign taped to the glass read, "Closed for inventory." My heart clenched with a mix of sadness and vindication. I knew it wasn't just a simple inventory issue. The cracks in Jake's management were widening, the pressure beginning to show. When I later took a rare step inside the shop, pretending to be just another customer, I was struck by the chaos within. Flowers lay wilting on the counters. The beautiful displays I once took pride in had become a disheveled mess. Jake was behind the counter, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, yet increasingly, as he attempted to smooth over another vendor issue, his eyes flitted nervously over the shop, barely recognizing me or the growing queue of disgruntled patrons. It was in one of those moments, as I stood quietly to the side, that I overheard a conversation between Jake and one of the suppliers I knew well. He was pleading for an extension on payments, his voice but tinged with an underlying panic. The vendor's reply was an ultimatum that left no room for negotiation. It was a stark reminder of the delicate balance that kept the business thriving and how easily it could tip over when mishandled. As the days dragged on, the whispers grew louder. Regulars began finding alternative florists, their loyalty shattered by the shop's decline. It was a pattern I anticipated, yet seeing it unfold was strangely affirming. I spent those nights sketching plans in the quiet sanctuary of my home, preparing for the moment I could reclaim what had been lost. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but each misstep Jake took fueled my resolve. It was becoming painfully clear that he couldn't maintain the foundation I had built. The realization stung, but also served as a guiding light, leading me closer to the future I was slowly crafting in the shadows. With every passing day, the shop's decline became more apparent, a shadow of its former self. I realized that I could use this opportunity to rebuild what I had lost, but in a way that was truly my own. With Jake clearly floundering, I began reaching out to the clients who had been loyal to us for so many years. I did this quietly, carefully, wanting to handle the situation with the same sensitivity I'd always valued in my business dealings. I started with the clients I'd had the longest relationships with, the ones who had become more like friends over the years. When I called them, it was as though no time had passed. Their voices lit up with warmth and familiarity. I'd always prided myself on maintaining these connections, and hearing their responses reassured me that my efforts had not been in vain. "Hi, Sarah," I started during one call, keeping my tone inviting and open. "I just wanted to check in. You know how much I've always appreciated your feedback." She responded with gratitude, her words like a balm to my heart. "We miss your touch at the shop," she said softly, her meaning clear. It was no secret that the service and quality had suffered since I'd left. I assured her that I was considering some new projects and was eager to keep her in the loop about my next steps. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Word spread quietly, as it does in close-knit communities, and soon other clients began reaching out to me, curious and about what I might be planning. I shared only as much as was necessary, hinting at new opportunities without delving into specifics. Each conversation was a subtle dance, a careful balancing act of providing enough information to entice without showing my full hand. I found that people were genuinely about my possible return to the industry, something that filled me with both hope and determination. They expressed a understanding of Jake's situation but remained loyal to the quality and service they remembered from my tenure. The more I heard about the complaints, the more my resolve hardened. Jake had taken over something he didn't understand, and it was apparent in every interaction, every mistake. Clients felt neglected, and suppliers grumbled about his lack of business acumen. It was clear the business was slipping through his fingers. I made a point to meet some of these clients in person when possible. We'd sit over coffee, discussing their needs and how I could meet them in the future. These meetings were bittersweet. While it was disheartening to hear how far the shop had fallen, it was also empowering to realize the trust they still placed in me. One afternoon, over a particularly revealing chat, a client, Rebecca, shared her disappointment with how Jake was handling things. "It's just not the same," she confessed, frustration evident in her voice. "The personal touch is gone." I nodded, expressing empathy without placing blame squarely on Jake. "I'm working on something new," I hinted. Her eyes lit up at the prospect, providing me with the silent encouragement I needed. Meanwhile, Jake remained oblivious to these conversations happening beyond his awareness. His focus was solely on keeping the shop afloat, a task that seemed to grow more insurmountable by the day. Each client I quietly reclaimed felt like a small victory, a necessary step towards reclaiming my career, my identity. But it wasn't just about poaching clients, it was about restoring the integrity and passion that had initially defined the business. So, I took note of every suggestion, every compliment or critique, weaving them into the plans I continued to sketch out each night. I maintained a cautious facade whenever I encountered Jake or my father. I didn't need to engage directly, knowing my actions spoke louder than any confrontation could. They remained convinced, it seemed, that everything was going as they'd intended, that underestimation would be their undoing. Through this methodical process, I reclaimed the confidence that had been momentarily shaken. It was empowering to know that as I quietly reestablished connections, the foundation for my new venture was strengthening. Little by little, I was drawing clients back to me, ensuring that when the time came, I would not only reclaim what had been taken but surpass it. As Jake's mismanagement grew more apparent, I realized it was time to act on the groundwork I had been quietly laying. The shop's decline was noticeable not just in fading blooms but in the strained expressions of those who used to adore what I'd built. This wasn't just a business. It was part of my identity, and I couldn't let it wither away under Jake's careless hands. I began reaching out to our old vendors, the ones I developed relationships with over the years. There was a particular rhythm to these meetings, a familiarity that made our discussions seamless. Over coffee or impromptu lunches, I spoke with each vendor personally, reminding them of the golden days when our collaboration had been mutually beneficial. Most were glad to see the familiar face behind the new venture I hinted at, eager to return to a partnership they trusted. One meeting stood out to me. Leonard, our main flower supplier, had always been fond of our business model. As we sat in a small cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloping us, he looked at me with a mix of nostalgia and hope. "I miss the old days," he said, a smile playing at his lips, "when you ran the place." I nodded, allowing him to feel the weight of what I was about to say. "I'm planning something new, Leonard, something closer to what we had." His eyes sparkled with interest, as if he'd been waiting for this very moment. Jake, meanwhile, remained oblivious to these meetings, consumed by the fires he was trying to put out at the shop. His negligence was my quiet advantage. Without him even realizing, I negotiated exclusive agreements for my upcoming venture. Each contract signed felt like a victory, tying the threads of my new enterprise together, ensuring it would flourish where his had floundered. It wasn't just about the logistics, though. Every conversation I had with a supplier or client was carefully crafted to breathe life into my vision. I found myself talking less about the past and more about the potential of what lay ahead. My excitement was contagious, sparking interest and loyalty in those who once felt abandoned by the shop's decline. At home, these maneuvers provided a sense of solace amidst the familial turmoil. I remained cordial during family gatherings, listening to Jake's anxious musings about cash flow and dwindling stock with an air of superficial concern. My father often looked between us, his expression a mask of regret, though he rarely addressed the elephant in the room. Perhaps he hoped the issue would resolve itself without direct confrontation. I suspected he underestimated just how far I'd go to restore what was mine. Despite the undercurrent of tension, I maintained my facade, letting my actions speak instead. My father might have signed the papers handing over the shop to Jake, but he couldn't sign away my determination or the relationships I'd forged over time. One evening, as I reviewed the latest supplier contract by the warm glow of a desk lamp, I realized something pivotal. The new venture was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a tangible reality, one poised to eclipse the shadow of the past. The shop I once nurtured had become a lesson in resilience, its demise a stepping stone toward an even brighter future. I could sense the tides turning. More vendors were coming on board with each passing week, and the whispers of my new venture began to circulate quietly around town. I steered these murmurings with precision, ensuring that when I was ready to launch, the anticipation would speak volumes. As I closed my notebook that night, a rare sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't just the contracts stacked neatly on my desk or the supportive messages from old clients that buoyed my spirit. It was the knowledge that I was reclaiming what had been unjustly taken, not through confrontation, but through creation. I was rebuilding stronger and wiser than before. It was a quiet revenge crafted in the diligence of new beginnings and the careful orchestration of connections. I was no longer just the daughter who built a shop, but the architect of a new vision, one that would rise above the betrayal. And as I prepared for the next phase, I knew without doubt I would succeed. The morning I launched my own florist shop, the air was crisp with possibility. I'd found a charming little storefront just 2 blocks from the original family shop. It was a stroke of luck, really, situated on a busy corner with plenty of foot traffic and, more importantly, within the same community I had grown to know and love. As I stood before the newly painted doors, a thrill coursed through me. This was mine, built with my own grit and vision, without the shadow of anyone else's legacy. Word had spread, like I had planned, and by the time we officially opened, there was already a line of people waiting. Many were familiar faces, clients I'd worked with for years, their loyalty shining brighter than ever. I greeted each one with genuine warmth, savoring their presence as both validation and sweet justice. Inside, the atmosphere felt vibrant, the scent of fresh blooms mingling with the buzzing excitement. My team, a group of dedicated individuals who had worked with me before, shared in my enthusiasm. Together, we transformed the space into a veritable garden of colors and scents, each arrangement more stunning than the last. I caught sight of Leonard, my main supplier, standing just inside the entrance. His expression was one of quiet approval, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. It felt like a victory, knowing he chose to support my venture over Jake's mismanaged operation. As I moved through the shop, assisting my team and chatting with clients, I sensed the buzz in town growing. People whispered about the new florist with admiration, their words flowing into the streets, making their way over to the old family shop. I knew Jake would hear these whispers too, that the city was alive with the news of my opening, eclipsing the old family shop as it buckled under his poor management. Late in the afternoon, as the shop continued to thrive, I took a quiet moment to reflect. Everything I'd worked for, the late nights, the endless planning, every risk I'd taken, was unfolding beautifully. The betrayal I once felt now seemed distant, overshadowed by the reality of my success. My shop was bustling with life, each sale echoing the support I had garnered, the connections I had nurtured. I could almost imagine Jake standing in the empty aisles of the old shop, the silence around him a stark contrast to the energy inside mine. There was a sense of irony in it all, knowing that the business he thought he was entitled to had faded, while mine flourished. In the end, his unjust gain had set the stage for my ultimate triumph. As I glanced around the colorful display of flowers and the joyful faces of everyone who entered, a profound peace settled within me. I had reclaimed more than a business. I had reclaimed my pride, my purpose, and most importantly, the trust and respect of those around me. Watching the day's success unfold, I knew the journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, but I felt ready for them. With a sense of resolve, I prepared for what was to come, knowing with certainty that any hurdles would be met with the same determination that brought me here. The shop would stand as a testament to resilience, a beacon of my journey from betrayal to redemption, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the bustling storefront, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't just building a business anymore, I was building a legacy, one that was entirely mine. The family meeting wasn't anything unusual at first. We gathered in my parents' living room, sunlight streaming through the drapes, casting a warm glow that belied the tension beneath the surface. My father was there, sitting silently in his armchair, staring at the floral-patterned carpet with a solemnity that seemed new even for him. Jake stood by the mantel, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, visibly uncomfortable. There was a stillness as I settled into the sofa, meeting my father's gaze briefly. I could feel the unsaid words hanging heavy in the air, everything unsaid yet vividly present. Jake cleared his throat, a nervous gesture that did nothing to break the awkward silence. I waited, not needing to push the conversation forward. Whatever needed to be said would come out in its own time. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice carrying an edge of defeat I had never heard before. He admitted in a shaky tone, "I can't keep the shop running anymore." His confession didn't bring me joy, but a quiet acknowledgement of the truth we all had seen coming. My father looked up, relief mingling with disappointment on his features. "It was supposed to be a family legacy," he murmured, almost to himself, as if trying to reconcile his hopes with reality. I watched Jake grapple with the weight of his own failures, feeling a strange sense of distance from the whole scene. Jake continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. I thought I could handle it, but it's different when you haven't built it yourself." His admission carried a resignation that seemed to echo in the room, acknowledgement that the path he'd taken had been too easy, too effortless, and not without its cost. I remained quiet, my expression. There was no need for me to add to his humiliation. His struggle was self-inflicted, and any words of mine would only serve as unnecessary salt in his wounds. Watching him say it aloud felt like witnessing the final act of a play, the climax where the truth was inevitable, no longer something that could be ignored or denied. My mother, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward slightly, her voice soft. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider things," she suggested, trying to offer a semblance of comfort in the aftermath of his admission. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, perhaps hoping for a gesture of reconciliation. I offered none, merely nodding in recognition of Jake's honesty, but withholding any words of forgiveness or family unity. That bridge had been too splintered for mere words to repair. The meeting drew to a close with Jake's acknowledgement of the shop's end. He promised to officially close its doors by month's end, a task that had seemed monumental, now reduced to mere formality. As the meeting dispersed, I lingered a moment longer in my seat, watching as Jake moved towards the kitchen, seeking solitude. As I stood to leave, my father caught my arm gently. "You did well with the new shop," he said, his voice tinged with a mixture of pride and regret. It seems you have a talent for this." His words hung between us, neither an apology nor an absolution, but an acknowledgement of past mistakes and present realities. I nodded, accepting his praise, but not dwelling on what couldn't be changed. Leaving their house, I was enveloped by the evening air, a reminder of the world beyond our family's drama. The street was quiet, the sun setting in a blaze of colors, comfortingly indifferent to personal struggles. I walked home with a sense of resolve, a clarity that had eluded me in earlier days. The closure of the old shop was not just an ending, but a beginning, a chance to build on the foundation I had reclaimed, not through inheritance, but through hard-earned effort and undeniable skill. Each step I took away from that meeting was towards a future I had shaped myself. And as the door of my home closed behind me, I felt the satisfying weight of justice, naturally earned, resting softly on my shoulders. The day when the papers of dissolution were finally signed felt like an ending and a beginning all rolled into one. I stood quietly in the room, a silent witness to Jake's hesitant signature that sealed the fate of the old family shop. It was an intimate gathering, just the three of us, my father, Jake, and myself. The echo of the pen on paper felt monumental. As Jake wrote his name with shaky hands, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions bubbling up within me. There was no satisfaction in watching him struggle, only acknowledgement of what had come to pass. My father, standing beside him, looked on with a distant gaze, probably reflecting on his part in this unraveling. He caught my eye briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between us. Once the papers were signed, I took a deep breath, the weight of all these months lifting slightly from my shoulders. The dissolution legally transferred any remaining business assets back to me, though they were merely remnants. The true victory was my thriving new shop, standing just a few streets away, bustling with life and laughter. Jake stepped away from the table, his demeanor. I almost expected him to say something, maybe an apology or at least an acknowledgement of how things had turned out, but he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the ground as though searching for answers that never came. Turning towards my father, I wondered if he would offer anything more substantial than the vague regret he'd shown before. His voice was, when he spoke, I'm sorry for how it all happened. There was sincerity there, the first glimpse of the father I once relied on. Thank you, I replied softly, knowing it was the closest to an apology I would get. I didn't need more, not anymore. The success of my new shop was proof enough of what I could accomplish. As I collected my things, a sense of closure enveloped me. My business stood not just as a replacement, but as a triumph of my skills and effort, a testament to my dedication despite the betrayal. I realized then that I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine, but redefining it on my terms. Before leaving, I paused for a moment, taking in the finality of it all. I knew this endeavor had changed me in ways subtle and profound. The sense of justice wasn't just in regaining ownership, but in watching the return of my own autonomy. I felt lighter, ready to embrace the future with an open heart. As I walked out into the bright afternoon, the world outside seemed more vibrant, full of possibilities. Every step felt purposeful, leading me towards a destiny I'd crafted with care. The road spread out before me, inviting, promising a journey shaped by my own hands. And as I returned to my flourishing shop, I knew that I had truly won far more than the paper that sealed Jake's defeat. I had regained my peace.